All right, welcome to Halitics on Wednesday. So glad to talk to you. This will be the third to last live stream I do this year, 2023. I'll be on tomorrow and, of course, Friday for the free-for-all. So if you want to talk to me, you only got a few more days to chime in, share your thoughts on the topics du jour. Today is obviously a big day for news with the Colorado Supreme Court blocking Trump from the ballot next year in the presidential race, effective next year. I mean, right now they stayed the decision. They know, the Supremes know, they are based on their 4-3, narrow decision. It was, hotly contested that Trump is barred because he was found to have engaged in an insurrection against the United States. I think this is really a fascinating point of law. For those who don't know, I was actually involved earlier in at least one similar case that was brought against Marjorie Taylor Greene in Georgia, calling for her to be barred from the ballot in 2022 because she engaged allegedly in that insurrection back on, January 6th, I believe. And that lawsuit against Greene was actually dismissed by the Colorado Secretary of State, who convened a hearing, heard testimony, and made a decision that the case against Marjorie Taylor Greene was not made. The case that she was, in fact, an insurrectionist was not proven. And I think that was the right decision. I mean, I was with a team that was seeking her dismissal, and I wasn't, from the ballot based on 9/11. I'm sorry, 9/11. There's so many dates, right? January 6th. We have, October 7 was the, or October 6 was the attacks in Israel. I got to get that right by Hamas. So there are a number of different dates, but anyway, the January 6, 2021 insurrection does form, or alleged insurrection does now form the basis for the Colorado decision to block Trump. And I am really of two minds. I honestly, this just came out, so there's still a lot of digesting that I'm going to have to do to come to a kind of a place where I, decide whether I think it was the right thing, the wrong thing, where do I fall on it. I have real trepidation about blocking somebody from the ballot in any election. I think democracy means that the people decide, not the courts, who will represent them. That said, some crimes, some actions, some activities, I think, should rise to a level where the perpetrator should not be allowed to represent the people in office. I'm not sure what Trump has been accused of having done or what's been proven that he did rise to that level. And whether it is proven or not, it's going to cause a lot of anger, a lot of anxiety, a lot of resentment in a very large percentage of the American populace. Not perhaps over 50%, but maybe over 50%, because people who don't support Trump, don't like Trump, may also not like this decision that takes out of the people's hands, assuming it's upheld, it takes out of the people of Colorado's hands, and it may take out of other states' voters' hands as well, if it's cited, if it's upheld in the end, and if it's relied upon by other courts. So it's very momentous. It's problematic in certain ways. That doesn't mean it was the wrong decision. I'm not sure if I think it was the right decision or not. I want your help. What do you think? Did Colorado do the right thing? We'll get into some of the specifics, and now I hear the phone ringing. So and I don't know if you heard that ring. I think you probably did. No, you didn't, unless you heard it bleed in. But we've got John very early. So John, let me get you in just one moment. There we go. That was a little loud, that monitor. So John, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I sure can. Yes, you're on early. I haven't set the table, but I did ask the question. So I hope you'll weigh in if that on the decision yesterday by the court and how you feel about it.
Yeah, I was thinking about that yesterday. What I'm hearing Republicans say, on threads, and I guess they're on Twitter saying it is to let the voters decide. But I don't think that having the voters decide a constitutional question like that, that's very nuanced. I think that's what they have elected representatives for, and of course the courts are appointed by those elected representatives. So it is really the people. They are doing that on behalf of the people, rendering that decision. I think staying the decision and so that it could be appealed was the right thing to do. But in the end, I think ultimately, in order to deprive someone of running for office, I think the due process clause should come into effect, and there really should be some sort of conviction. That they cannot just have the court of public opinion decide that he's guilty of insurrection. That there needs to be a formal conviction.
That's a great point, John. That's sort of where I was too. Was Trump afforded the process that he is most assuredly due under the Constitution? And I think that's a very, very close question. I'm not sure I have an answer to that, John, because there was testimony taken at the trial court level. By the way, this question of due process was very closely addressed in the court decision, well over 100 pages. I haven't read all of it, but that's what I really looked at, because to me, that's the most important. How was the decision made that Trump engaged in the insurrection, therefore was covered under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which I put on the screen now so folks can see in large size. But basically, there has to be a conclusion, in my view, which process afforded the candidate who is being challenged that they engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States. And so the question is, was that process given Trump? And then there's some other questions. For example, is the presidency covered? Yes, we know Senate representatives are covered. House representatives, senators are covered. Electors are covered. Those are identified specifically. Is the president also barred if the presidential candidate also barred? I think the language is clear. It says if you hold, you can't run for any office. You can't hold any office. On the other hand, why then does it specify senator and representative, but doesn't specify president? To me, this is clear enough. If Trump is found to have engaged in insurrection, yes, he is barred. I don't know if I even love that amendment. It doesn't really matter whether I like it, whether you like it. It matters whether it's the law. It is the law of the land. Was he afforded due process, John? The trial court heard a lot of witnesses. Ken Buck, who is a former attorney general in Colorado, testified on Trump's behalf. A number of the people who were at the January 6th events testified. The decision was made based on clear and convincing evidence. It seems like the court pretty much dotted its I's and crossed its T's. So I'm kind of leaning towards this is a defensible, legally sufficient decision. I'm not sure if in the end it is good for our democracy.
Well, I think that we shouldn't let, when you say it's not good for our democracy, you're saying you don't want to hurt the feelings of one faction in the United States. But what happens? What if it is a fact that faction is depraved and they just don't care if their representative, their candidate has engaged in insurrection, and they're going to be dishonest and swear to their grave that he didn't, even though he obviously did.
Well, court decisions are really important, and we have to respect them, and that's part of democracy. And I'm not saying I definitely think it would be bad for democracy, but I think there should be a very strong presumption to let the voters decide. That presumption can be overridden, and we may be at that point. I'm not convinced we are. I'm not convinced we're not. my inclination again is without a court, an actual criminal conviction, my inclination would be to let Trump on the ballot. But that said, that's not what the amendment says. That's not what the 14th Amendment says. So it's a really tough, to my way of thinking, this is a very tough legal issue.
Well, it sounds like, I guess you kind of changed my mind on something here, Hal. It sounds like they did litigate the matter, and he cannot be convicted at the state level. It's not a Colorado crime. Well, at least not one that was committed in Colorado. I don't know if it is a crime on their books, but so they really don't have jurisdiction to jail him. But you convinced me that they did give him due process, and they have jurisdiction to keep him off the ballot. I'm now more convinced that it was the right thing to do, I guess, that they at least it was their right to do it. And the argument that letting the voters decide is kind of moot because the voters did decide indirectly. You know, it almost seems like Republicans are now making the argument that they want in this instance, because they feel it's going to benefit them, a direct democracy, which is something that they disparage all the time. It feels like another more hypocrisy from them.
I read the decision by the trial judge. I put on the screen right here I can't say I read it word for word. It wasn't like I'm getting paid by the hour to read these things, but I did the best I could in short notice, John, because the court in the Supreme Court of Colorado, which, by the way, I want to just briefly, maybe this is bragging. When I was in law school, actually after I graduated, or while I was before I graduated, but close to graduation, I did fly out to Denver and interviewed with a couple of the justices. I was really hoping to get picked to be a clerk on that court, which would have been very prestigious. I did not get selected, so I'm disappointed. But I'll be honest with you, I'm still proud of the fact that they did choose to interview me to be a clerk on that court. It would have been pretty cool. I have to say, it would have been nice, but what have you? Who knows if the clerks who were representing the Supreme Court justices of Colorado obviously were very closely involved in this decision, and that's the kind of thing you get to do if you're a clerk in a state top court. So it would have been pretty awesome. So I'm sorry. I guess I didn't get that opportunity is what I'm saying. A little bit of wistfulness, perhaps. Yeah, the court absolutely addressed this question. They said, yeah, we did give Trump due process. Now, I don't know that they did. I'm not sure I agree with that, but I'm not sure I don't think they did either. These are new, basically de novo questions. They've never been addressed, John. So they're making law as they go along. And when that happens, let me just finish what I was going to say. And I know I'm talking a lot, but when that happens, yes, you get, as you put it, hurt feelings, you get anger, you get resentment. It's not good. This is not a good time to be making new law. That said, they are forced to do it. They have no choice.
It sounds like the constitutional question here is with regard to who gets to decide who committed insurrection. Does the federal government, do the federal courts decide who was involved in insurrection, and then the states get to remove them from the ballot if they so choose, or do the states get to decide because the states get to run their own elections, and really all they're trying to do is remove him from the ballot? I mean, it seems to me that this is just one of those things where if it was going to be for the benefit of the Democrat, the federal courts, the Supreme Court of the United States would ultimately decide against it. If it's going to be for the benefit of the Republican, they'll ultimately decide for it, And
I think the threshold question, look, it's clearly it's a federal question because decision was based on the Constitution and specifically the 14th Amendment, which sets as the threshold question, did the candidate engage in an insurrection or rebellion? But then you raise a good point. This is why, lawyers, I guess, get paid a lot of money. But then you get the thorny question of, well, who decides what is an insurrection, what is a rebellion? Certainly Congress could pass a law that defines insurrection as A or defines it as B. And I think then the state courts would have to abide by those definitions. But there's no clear law on what constitutes insurrection or rebellion either. There's arguments. There are some cases that address the question, and some of those are over 150 years old. Some of them date back to the actually 18th century, right after the Revolutionary War, John. So very thorny questions. It's never really been litigated fully. We don't know what due process means. The Colorado Supreme Court is making it up as they go along. And frankly, I don't mean that pejoratively. It's what they have to do.
Yeah. And Colorado, I think, from the latest polls is shown as like up for grabs. It could go either way.
Do you think this could ironically benefit Trump? I'm not saying it would. I'm asking you if there might be some, because there is a backlash. There's a backlash not just among Trump voters, but among kind of undecideds, independents, who, as I phrased it earlier, don't like the decision being, as they see it, taken out of their hands.
Yeah, if it's perceived as an abuse of power, then there will definitely be a backlash. That's what the voters have demonstrated time and again, is that they don't like overreach, but unfortunately, most of them can't really determine on their own what is overreach and what isn't. I think the average American voter doesn't really read the news, and they just kind of go off of sound bites that they hear on conservative media or often the mainstream shill media that's shilling for Republicans. But I think that it could help him if it's perceived to be an abuse of power.
John, you're saying that a lot of people aren't really fully versed and maybe ignorant of much of the law. I mean, I like to think that I'm pretty well informed, and certainly as a former practicing lawyer, I better qualified than most to address this question. Frankly, I have no idea. I don't know whether they overreached or not. I mean, the law just doesn't really offer any comfort, or very little comfort in this case, in my opinion. I'll tell you what I would like, and that's why I don't really like this amendment. What I really would like is that it be, this isn't the law, but I wish the law said there has to be a conviction by a criminal court. I think that would be so much preferred. And then let people charge Trump. I mean, there have been charges. Look, there were charges brought by the state of Georgia, right, against Trump for election interference. If he was convicted of that, fine. I could say rely on that conviction to ban him. I do have trouble, and I understand there was a court. It did take testimony. It did hear witnesses. That may well satisfy the conditions of the 14th Amendment. It doesn't satisfy my conditions. My conditions are have an actual criminal case brought and have a decision by a jury, or if it's determined by a judge, that Trump or whoever violated the law.
I think that's ultimately what's going to be decided. I really do. It's when it's appealed, when they're going to say, well, I think the final appeal might even be postponed beyond the point where they think that the insurrection trial might be wrapped up, which I think the insurrection trial is going to take a long time. But that's another interesting thing. What do you think is going to come to a conclusion first, the insurrection trial or the trial or the appeal for whether or not he gets to be on the ballot in Colorado?
The appeal of the Colorado decision?
That'll come first?
I think that the Colorado decision will be the appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court will come. The answer will come first before the criminal trials, which I think have been largely stayed, right, or delayed, at least in New York, maybe not in Georgia. And of course, those can be appealed too. But this will go directly, I believe, from the Colorado Supreme Court to the U.S. Supreme Court. Maybe not, but I believe that's what's going to happen. And if it is, then I think this case will be determined by the U.S. Supreme Court. And frankly, I hope they determine it. As I said, I would prefer that a conviction must be held against a candidate who's barred from the ballot, but that isn't what the Constitution says. John, what do you think should be you're good with you? I think you said, based on what I've meant, based on what I said, assuming it's accurate, you're okay with the Colorado Supreme Court decision, or you agree with it, which is fine. I think I agree with it as a matter of law. I don't have a problem with it as a matter of law. I just have a problem with it as a matter of what I think the law should be.
I think ultimately I agree with what they decided, but I think that shows my bias, actually, because I think the fairest process is that there is a formal conviction, and that I think it could have saved the state courts in Colorado, a lot of time and all those procedures that they had, those hearings, and whereas if there's a federal conviction, that it can just go straight. They don't need to call witnesses in Colorado. It can just be a hearing as to whether or not they're going to remove him or not. And
yeah, and you mentioned a federal
I
trial. I'll tell you what, I would be fine if the conviction was in a state court. If Trump will get full process, he'll get all process due in that in the Georgia cases. So
yeah, but that's not an insurrection case, right? Isn't it impossible to convict somebody of insurrection in a state court?
Oh, you may be right about that.
Right?
It may not be an insurrection case, but you know what? If he's found guilty of election tampering, then I would be fine with him being barred on the ground that he's guilty of a high crime. Well, that's for being impeachment. But yeah, I guess the 14th Amendment only will allow it based on insurrection or rebellion. So maybe the Georgia decision, if it comes that he did engage in election tampering, maybe wouldn't be sufficient under the Constitution, but I guess this is where I have problems with the law in both ways. I think it should bar him.
What happens if they define? What happens if what an insurrection is gets explicitly defined in the federal courts sometime soon, and the language includes election tampering? I mean, I doubt that it would, because there are all kinds of Republicans tampering with elections, and I couldn't see a conservative Supreme Court doing that. But I'm just thinking at that point, it does open it up to the states. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
because
if you define for the purposes of the 14th Amendment, election tampering as an insurrection rebellion, which I don't think is that big a stretch, right? Because you're basically, again, trying to take control of the government by some sort of force or subterfuge, not by winning an election fairly. So if there was a specific law passed that defined for this purposes insurrection or rebellion as a including tampering, yeah, then I think you're right. The Colorado court could rule. Now they might have to make that a amendment to the Constitution, right? You might have to amend the Constitution to define insurrection the way you want it, but I'm not certain of that. Because they can bind the courts, because law binds courts, right? So if a law says this is what insurrection or rebellion means, then yeah, the court should be bound by that.
And that would that open up dual sovereignty, or would some of these still be, like, would election tampering still be a state level crime, or gosh, I mean, how would that work?
I don't
Like
know.
if
You know
somebody
what? I
were
feel like
from,
I'm back in law school. You're one of my professors. You're asking me. You're asking questions I can't answer, man. I don't know. I don't know. I'm
I don't know
talking
either.
more like I know that I really do. I don't. I just don't know the answers to these. They're so thorny, and I honestly think the courts don't know either. A lot of times.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess they have to listen to the arguments and then figure it out.
And
Well,
they come to
yeah,
different conclusions, right? One court will say one thing and another will go in a different direction.
yeah, and then it's got to all be ironed out by the Supreme Court. Can you think of any instances where different districts were decided differently, and then the Supreme Court refused to hear it? Do they ever do that and just allow the law to be different in different districts?
I don't have an answer to that either. I do know that the Michigan Supreme Court, I believe, I shouldn't say I know. I'm relatively confident when I say this that this happened. And you might know better than I do. The Michigan Supreme Court dismissed a challenge against Trump based on the same constitutional amendment, saying that it was not for them to rule that he was disqualified.
To rule that he was disqualified. Oh, okay.
So this Michigan court heard the same challenge based on the same amendment and made a different decision. And the Colorado court actually refers to that, and they says, well, Michigan law is different. Michigan has different procedures. So maybe under the Michigan rule, they would come to a different conclusion. To me, that's hugely problematic, right? Because it's a constitutional amendment that's, I believe, supposed to be the law of the land. How can it be okay for Trump to be on the ballot in one state but not in another? It seems to be either yes or no across the board since it's federal law.
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess it doesn't make, there's no point in us continuing this line of questioning, is there? Because it could get,
well, it's moot. It's moot. I mean, we don't know, and the courts obviously decide with regardless. And your view, though, is, well, you said, you think there could be some. What about the possibility that this leads, and I don't think it's a very weak one, John, but what if this leads to a DeSantis presidency?
If it leads to a DeSantis presidency?
Yeah, because Trump is ultimately barred and the Republicans nominate Trump. I mean, DeSantis, rather, not Trump.
Yeah, I would say we are worse off in some ways. And gosh, I don't even know the only thing that concerns me is I don't know what DeSantis's relationship with Russia is. Would DeSantis pull a 10-inch thick book out of a CIA vault and then have it disappear? Would he do that for money? I don't think he would. He used to be a U.S. Army intelligence officer, I think, in Gitmo. I wouldn't. So I feel like safer with DeSantis having control of our national secrets. But I do think that DeSantis also would unfortunately cut Ukraine off, and I think you probably see that as a good thing.
That's an area where I absolutely think we need to get out of. Absolutely,
I won't open that can of worms, but I also think that DeSantis would essentially accomplish the conservative wish list without drawing a lot of attention to himself, whereas Trump made a big circus out of it all. And
seems like DeSantis is almost more of a sadist, though. Seems like Trump's a bombastic, he's a bloviator, he's narcissistic. But I feel like DeSantis is just kind of cruel.
He is cruel. He absolutely is cruel. Yeah, and he's also very just very controlling too. He wants to control. He's got his hands too much in information dissemination, like with his school system over there. Yeah, he would be he would definitely be a problem in some ways, like a much bigger problem than Trump, and not as much of a problem as Trump in other ways.
Well, it's tough times. John, I really appreciate your call. I haven't heard from you in a while. Great to have you call in. I'm glad this topic excited your interest. I'm going to move on. I want to talk a little bit about Israel and anti-Semitism, which has also been a big part of this show. So, hey, I wish you a great holiday, and I hope you'll call again soon, if not this week.
Yeah, thanks, Hal. I'll call as I listen to your show, but sometimes I can't call in because I'm in a client's house and just.
No, I mean, look, I don't expect anything. I just really appreciate anybody, I appreciate your chiming in when you do and adding immeasurably to the show. So thank you. And I always hate even hanging up on you because I want everyone to feel welcome, but I just want to get to this next topic.
Of course. All right. Well, happy holidays to you.
You too, John. And what a great guy. He really is, really. I met John at least probably several times. I know I met him once at studio and once at his house with his dogs. I don't think those dogs would be with us now. It's been so many years, but one of the best parts of being a radio operator and host was get the really tremendous people I met over the years and the friends I made. So, I mean, what can you say? That's, I guess, one of the great things when you get out there and you get to meet folks. And it was much better to just draw a comparison than being a lawyer when mostly I was just working with other lawyers. I mean, not that I had a problem with them, but it was a pretty narrow, constricted universe of people that I dealt with. You say, well, and as a trial lawyer, so I would meet with judges a lot, but they're lawyers, right? I mean, they're lawyers. And so most of my interactions were with kind of a relatively narrow subset or class of people. And that's fine. I think we owe it to ourselves to meet as many different people as we can and really get different perspectives. And that was a great part of being in radio and getting to meet really just tremendous people like John. I mean, not everyone was, I can't say, wonderful memories of everyone I met, but wow, that was a good one. All right, so moving on, I had framed this call today, this live stream, as focusing on the decision by the Colorado Supreme Court. I will continue to revisit in the next few days and then presumably next year. But I do want your comments as well. I also have been very focused, as those who are regulars or even, periodically tune in, on Israel-Palestine and also on anti-Semitism. Arlen and I discussed anti-Semitism, and I expressed skepticism of the claim that there's been an upsurge in anti-Semitism since October 7th? October 7th. Yeah, October 7th. I just put it on the screen so I wouldn't forget. I looked over there. Yeah, October 7th. I expressed some skepticism. And I was asked, well, why do you doubt it? There certainly have been a lot of people saying that they're subject to anti-Semitic attacks. So why are you asking for time, place, description? Why are you showing, why would you doubt that this is happening? And so I have several answers why it's important, I believe, to be skeptical, trust but verify. Why? First of all, I think it's really important because a lot of people, and especially Israel and Israel defenders, have defined anti-Semitism to include any criticism of Israel or any criticism that they decide they think isn't appropriate, whether, the rest of us think it is or isn't. So this defacement of a synagogue's sign that's very close to my house, within a mile, has been called anti-Semitic. Now, we can debate it. If you think that's anti-Semitic, I want to hear from you. I've asked somebody who says they've been targeted because they're Jewish since October 7. I want to hear from them. And I've asked them to join me. I hope they will. I don't I will not conclude that this sign is anti-Semitic. I would agree it's anti-Israel. I would agree it's anti that synagogue because it's their sign on their property. But I don't see that sign as proof of anti-Semitism or even of evidence of anti-Semitism. If those X's were swastikas, then I would take a different view. But I would also be a little bit reluctant to just condemn, don't use a swastika. Let me just say, don't use a swastika. There's no swastika. Swastika is anti-Semitic. Clearly, it's Jew hatred. It's calling for people to be killed because they're Jewish. That defacement is saying, don't stand with Israel. That defacement of that sign is saying, Israel is not worthy of your support. That is not anti-Semitism in my book. We all can define whatever we want, however we want. But that's why, to me, it's so important to know just what those who claim anti-Semitism are talking about. Is this really some kind of anger, resentment, animus towards the Jewish people writ large? Or is it a specific challenge to those who back the Israeli state, even when it's committing atrocities, war crimes, ethnic cleansing? Because if it's the latter, I don't think that's anti-Semitic. There's another reason I have a real problem with claims of anti-Semitism that I don't believe stand up, even if people believe in their hearts that they were targeted because they're Jewish. Those claims are being used. Claims of anti-Semitic activity are being used to suppress pro-Palestine speech on campus. There's an article even in the New York Times about this very fact, that college presidents, under tremendous fire from wealthy donors to their schools, to suppress any activity, any action that could cause Jewish students to feel uncomfortable. And that includes, of course, pro-Palestine rallies. I was at a pro-Palestine rally in Washington, D.C. I wasn't uncomfortable in the least, and I'm Jewish. But some Jewish people might have been. And that discomfort might lead them to complain that they were subjected to anti-Semitism. I'm not saying they were. I don't agree with them, but they might say that, and they might really feel that in their hearts. And then the college presidents and the administrators might decide, well, we can't really have these pro-Palestine rallies because people will complain and we'll hear about it, and we could be out of a job, or our budgets might get cut. So I think it's very, very important that we understand exactly what is meant by anti-Semitism and what actions are taken that are supposedly anti-Semitic. I don't think that's anti-Semitic. I just can't endorse that conclusion. If you feel differently or if you agree, please call in 240-242-5646. I do think that sign, when it was posted, which was after October 7, but it's been up, and I get posted after October 7. I understand that because there were reports first 1,400, 1,500, 1,600 people murdered by Hamas, killed by Hamas. Now it's 1,200. There were upwards of 1,000 people killed on October 7 and many taken hostage. And that's very, very upsetting. Israelis were the victims of that attack. So I understand the impetus to put that sign up. But 2 months later, after we've seen Israel kill maybe 20,000 Gazans, when we've seen Israel reduce Gaza City into rubble, when we've seen Israel bomb hospitals and fail to justify doing so, when we've seen Israel bombing people fleeing their forces at the behest of Israel. And Israel saying, go to southern Gaza so you'll be safe, and then bombing refugee camps in southern Gaza. When we see bodies, when we actually see the images of bodies, including children, lined up in a school where they were shot by Israeli gunmen. When we know that a woman who was at a Catholic church was shot and killed. When we see all of that and you keep your sign up that says we stand with Israel, well, how can you conclude that's anything but pro-murder? It's Islamophobic. It's Palestine phobic. So to me, the sign itself is what is the evidence of bias, prejudice, tribalism. Not the defacement of it, the sign itself. Love to hear from you on this. 240-242-5646. And this was from Moco 360, which is our local media. This occurred over the weekend that they found that sign, I believe. I think they did a real nice job covering this. And again, I do want to have somebody on. Either you call now, or I'm efforting a guest who will talk about how they've been targeted because they're Jewish. So here's what My MC Media. No, it's not My MC Media. That's another local media outlet. We're kind of fortunate. This is Moco 360. So this is from Moco 360. Temple Emmanuel's "We Stand with Israel" banner was vandalized on Sunday with 3 black X's spray painted on it. That is completely accurate. We saw the picture. They were 3 X's spray painted on it, and it was vandalized. I mean, that's a sign it was vandalized. It was damaged. These are challenging times, said the synagogue in its notification to its members. Hatred towards Jews is alive and real. I highlighted that because I don't agree that that sign evidences hatred towards Jews. It's just not something one can conclude with any degree of confidence from that sign. I circled "We Stand with Israel" banner was vandalized. You'll know why in a moment when I get to the next image. But don't we need to come to some kind of agreement as to what really constitutes anti-Semitism? Which Jew hatred, fear of Jews, a belief that Jewish people are less worthy, less deserving of the same rights, the same justice as others? Is that what that sign shows? Because I don't see it. Do you see it? I don't see it. I know there's a Jewish star, right? There's a Star of David. That does represent Jews, but it also represents Israel. And that sign does look a lot. Maybe the colors are a little different. The blue's a little darker, but could be the way it was developed. Looks like the flag of Israel. So I can't, and I won't, and I'm Jewish, conclude that that is anti-Semitic. But let me know what your thoughts are. 240-242-5646. And by the way, please click like, please click subscribe, bottom right square. I need all the help I can get, folks. All right, let's get to more from that story. So I put up there some of the news report, how the banner itself was vandalized, and how I believe incorrectly was assumed to be evidence of hatred of Jews. Let me continue, because here is more from the statement that, again, Moco 360 posted. They include more from the statement. They also they do their own analysis. So Moco 360 says that the synagogue said it understands that people feel conflicted about the war in Israel. And the synagogue understands that they want to be clear that people understand that the synagogue supports the people of Israel, not the actions of the Israeli government. Okay, well, I appreciate that. But that's not clear by any means in the sign. The sign just says, we stand with Israel. It doesn't say we stand with victims of violence, of sectarian violence. It doesn't say we stand with innocent people who are killed or with hostages. It says we stand with Israel. I don't know how else to interpret that, but we stand with Israel, but we also stand with the Israeli government. And, take that as you will. Disagree all you want with me, but I think that's pretty darn clear that's what anyone, it's clear that that's what that sign is going to say to most people. We support the government of Israel's actions. And so then getting back to their statement, the addition, the actual language, the verbiage, we all decry the deaths of innocents. Okay, that's nice. Israelis and Palestinians alike. That's not on the sign, right? There's no stop the bombing. It's just we stand with Israel. So if you truly decry the deaths of innocents, why do you have a sign up that says we stand with Israel, which is killing innocent people? All right, we all want the hostages to be returned speedily and unharmed to their loved ones, synagogue leader said. Okay. Now, they also say there was a plan to replace the banner in January. So if the synagogue acknowledges by replacing the banner it's divisive, that it is going to cause people who are conflicted about what Israel is doing. In other words, they're conflicted because they're Jewish. Maybe they are Zionists. They want Israel to remain a Jewish state. They want Israel to survive, but they don't like what Israel's doing, so they're conflicted. If they understand all that and that sign is problematic, then why are you assuming in your letter that the motivation behind the defacement of the sign itself was Jew hatred, was anti-Semitism? You can't, because you've just acknowledged that people don't like that sign who are Jewish or who are other members of the community that you don't call anti-Semitic. All right, now I reacted strongly to this. I believe firmly that the great moral crisis our world is facing right now is the genocide of the Gazan people, is the wholly unjustified, wholly evil retaliation by Israel against Gaza. To me, that's what we as human beings must stand together against. And I want Temple Emmanuel to do that. I get that Temple Emmanuel has its own different agenda, and I get that they're like, hey, that sign really wasn't meant to say we support killing innocents. Okay, fine. Maybe it wasn't. But your moral duty goes beyond simply clarifying that you don't support the slaughter of innocents. Your moral duty goes to actually confronting Israel, especially as, look, this is a wealthy area. The people who are members of that synagogue are affluent. They are influential. Your duty at Temple Emmanuel is to confront the state of Israel and say, we don't support you. We don't support what you're doing. We're against it. We support the people of Gaza. That's your moral imperative. You didn't even go near there. You're on the other side. You're on the wrong side of this issue. And this drives me. I mean, it depresses me. It angers me. It causes me to yell. I got very angry at this tweet. This was by a delegate in Maryland. Her name is Kate Stewart. She took the place of one of my favorite delegates, Al Carr. Al didn't run. It's not like she, primary Al. They're both Democrats. We already saw this. Let me get to the tweet here. Here's the tweet. There, I keep jumping around. I'm sorry, folks. My bad. Hey, if you don't want to watch my live stream because of that, I get it. I do. Here's what Kate Stewart wrote. Those who vandalized Temple Emmanuel attempted to divide and intimidate members of this congregation or community. I have expressed my support to the leadership of the temple and been in touch with our county police department who are investigating this as a hate crime. So 2 points that jump out at me. One, and I made this in response, was the temple itself vandalized? That's not what the story says. The story is very clear. That's why I circled it. It was the sign that was defaced. And the sign is not affixed to the temple, not part of the temple. It's one of those banners in front of the temple. So I don't call that vandalizing Temple Emmanuel. I think Kate Stewart misstates what happened, misrepresents it. Did she do it deliberately? I don't know. I don't really care. Well, maybe they did attempt to divide. I don't know if they attempted to intimidate. I don't know what's the intimidation? What you say they were intimidating people. Who are they intimidating? Why is there intimidation? I'm not seeing intimidation. I'm not seeing threats. I'm not seeing swastikas or other signs of hatred. So I'm not sure where the intimidation factor lies. Yes, I think they were trying to divide. I think that members of the congregation who don't support Israel would be activated by that and say, yeah, we can't go along with this. But what's wrong with, I'm good with. And hate crime. Is it a hate crime again? I don't see that. I get there are those who would. So here's my response. Maybe it was a little over the top. Let me know if you disagree with this response. Either put it in the chat, put it in a comment, or just feel free, of course, to call, which is what I always want people to do. 240. What is that number? Now I got to go look. Let me see if I can get that number. 240-242-5646. And I responded, not seeing that the temple itself was vandalized. Was it? The banner backing genocide was defaced. And by the way, I'm a proud Jew tweeting here. So I was thinking, should I have said proud? I am proud. I'm proud of being Jewish. I am. I am. That's who I am. I'm not embarrassed by it. I'm very upset at my co-religionists. But hey, I'm loud and proud. I'm a Jew. That's who I am. I'm not problem. I don't have a problem with that. The banner backing genocide. Was that too strong? And that's really the question. Does that banner back genocide? Did I go too far? Well, I'll say this. It was, I believe, totally defensible to write that. Totally defensible. Was it? But did I go too far? Even so, even if it was defensible, and I'm kind of mixed on that. So let's see if we can get that banner. There we go. Does that banner alone back genocide? I certainly think the argument is there. We stand with Israel. Well, what's Israel doing? Israel is committing genocidal acts in Gaza. It is killing innocent children, men, and women just because of where they are. It is completely unconcerned with civilian casualties. It doesn't seem to be following any military script whatsoever. If you stand with that country, are you not backing their genocide? If I get that's going to be controversial to say. And maybe I shouldn't have written it the way I did. I'm not certain I was right. But again, the great moral crisis of our time is what Israel is doing to the people of Gaza. And our duty is to stand with the victims, the murdered, their families, those who are being bombed, those who are starving, those who are dehydrating because they don't have water. That's our duty. And I, for the life of me, cannot understand Why everyone doesn't get that. All right, there'll be more tomorrow. I will talk about probably, I hope to have a guest. I really want to parse that Supreme Court decision, which John helped with a lot today. Hard questions, no easy answers. This is complicated. That is complicated. Israel, Gaza, not complicated. Don't bomb and kill innocent people. Should Trump be barred from the ballot? Complicated.